Rev up your engines! Aaron Bell says, Scotty, if we tied up your hands, would you still be able to do the videos? Well, it'd be pretty hard because I film myself too. So I got to turn the camera on, set it up, and then walk in, realize the end result of what you see. And if I couldn't use my hands, I wouldn't be able to operate the camera. It would be rather boring. I'd have like a one shot to be there and it'd be me talking blah, blah, blah. Like a lot of the boring guys. See how boring this is? It's much better when I'm using my hands, right? I can explain things better. It makes it more exciting. Who wants a boring video, especially cars? It can get rather boring at times. So you got to spice it up a little bit, you know? After all, you know, they're just machines that get us from here to there, right? Not all that exciting. So you got to make them exciting. It's like anything else, you know? My wife was a teacher for years. Her students loved it because it was exciting for them. You know, they hated the old lady that would just sit there, now children, sit in your seats and recite the ABCs. No, you got to make it exciting. So no one would watch them if you tied my hands. I wouldn't be able to film them. Joshua Miller says, good morning, Scotty. Should I trade my 2013 Chevy Cruze, low mileage, for an 07 Cadillac Escalade with 200,000 miles, mint condition? Well, I wouldn't have either of those cars. The Cruzes I can't stand. They're all piles of junk, but you got low mileage. And the Escalade with 200,000 miles is probably ready to fall apart. You're kind of all over the place, though. You got a little Econobox car, and you're thinking about getting a giant Escalade that gets horrendous gas mileage that has 200,000 miles. If the transmission on an Escalade has never been replaced, you're going to spend a ton of money replacing it, because that's pretty much the limit of how long the trannies ever last in those. I mean, if it's got a rebuilt one, find out what mileage it was put in, and you'll see, okay, the first one lasted this many miles. The second one, if it was remanufactured one, might last as long again. I wouldn't buy either of those vehicles if I were you. I would not keep a Cruze. They're money pits as they age. Then again, so are the Escalade, you know? You're kind of comparing apples and oranges, only they're both rotten. Mike W. said, Scotty, can parking on an upslope driveway cause a car to flood out? This happened to my daughter's Corolla. The car never normally has problems. Well, I'm assuming you mean flooding out the engine with too much gasoline, right? And not that it's in a flood, because, of course, you know, if you're parked on an incline, the back part of the car is lower. If it floods, yeah, the back's going to get flooded. Park it as high as you can. But if you mean the engine floods out with too much gasoline, going at an angle in a Corolla normally shouldn't do anything, because it's a fuel-injected car. Now, if you had a really old dinosaur one from, you know, the early 80s or the 70s that was carbureted, yeah, because then you're at an angle and the float's at an angle and it could give the wrong amount of gas. That could happen. But a fuel-injected car, the only problem would be if you're at a real high incline and you're low on gas, it could be that it goes out and it wouldn't be flooding out. It wouldn't get any fuel at all. It would have the same symptom. You'd crank it and it wouldn't start, but it was because it was sucking air instead of fuel, because you're low on fuel and you're at a really high incline. But it would have to be a really high incline, because most of the time you got enough gas that the sump at the bottom is still going to suck the gas at the bottom of the tank, and you're not going to suck air. In terms of flooding it out, no, it can't. Now, if you do have some kind of an electrical problem, if the car is at an angle, maybe there's wires, and when they're at an angle, then they touch and short out. That could theoretically happen, but flooding it out itself, no. Grits Kennedy, sending you love, Scotty. I got a 2006 Dodge Ram 1500. The ignition is going out. It isn't the battery, the alternator, not the starter. 2 days ago, I put it in a key and it wouldn't do anything. Generally, that means your ignition switch is going bad. If you're sure that the battery tests good and that all the battery connections are on tight, there's no loose connections or corroded connections. If you had the starter load tested, it's not the starter, the ignition switches go out on those. Now, the electrical part is normally what goes on the electric switch part on the bottom of the console. When you turn the key, it stops working from old age. You can just replace that. That's a pretty simple thing. Any auto parts store, AutoZone, O'Reilly, Pep Boys, whatever, you can buy one there and put it in. It's not that big of a deal on the car, and that's probably what it is. Now, theoretically, you could even have a computer failure on it, but I mean, start with a simple thing, and that would be the ignition switch. Chase McClain says, what do you think? Can I mix different brands of oil in your engine as long as it's the same weight? I don't advise it, though. Theoretically, it's not going to make any difference, right? But manufacturers have different additives and different oils, right? So if you're mixing the additives and then you go to a different one that has different additives, who knows what the interactions will be? My philosophy with oils are, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. For my whole life, I've liked using Castrol oils. Now, they cost more. Yes, they do. But I've never had an engine problem in any of my cars. Whether I was driving a Ford or a Chevy or even an Opel or the Toyotas and Lexuses I have now, I never had engine problems. So I'm sticking to what works. Why would I switch? The problem too is you don't know what's in any of the oils. They won't tell you. They'll say, we have special Upra lubrication Z-Max Plus, this nonsense. They'll never tell you exactly what's in it because they say it's a trade secret. We don't want to share it with anybody else. So my advice, you got an oil that works, stick to it. I mean, if you're stuck somewhere and you're low on oil and you got to add oil, by all means, add oil. Better to have the right amount of oil than one that's a little bit different. But once you find one that works, just stick to it like I have. Generally, it'll treat you well. Slabby Pulse says, Scotty, I got a 97 Thunderbird with a 4.6 V8. What's your opinion on those? The Thunderbirds, as they aged, they weren't that popular. Then they stopped making them. Then they came back with that horrendous, it was retro style. But the engine was horrible. The electrical systems were absolute crap. Just junk, right? A 97, it's never really going to be a collector's item, but that 4.6 V8 can run forever. Those were solid built cars. Now, on the other hand, they're kind of gas hogs too, It was a late 90s, big V8 gas hog car, but if you like the car and it's not too high mileage, you can always get parts for them. They stopped making them because basically the Thunderbird started out as a sports car, then it kind of evolved into a family car, then it evolved into God knows what kind of car, and then they stopped making them. Then they tried to bring them back as a sporty car, but that was a massive failure. They were just garbage wagons, and that is not a bad car. If you like it, fix it up, drive it around. It's never going to be a collector's car worth a lot of money. It wasn't that kind of car, but if you like driving it around, heck, you can drive them an awful long time with those engines in them. Augustin Roa says, Scotty, what do you think of a 2007 BMW X5? Well, perhaps one of the biggest money pits ever made. Anchor at CBS when I was there, he bought one of those things. He said it was the worst car he ever had. And this guy was making $350,000 a year. He said it was horrible. It was always breaking. Now, he did buy it used because he didn't want to waste the money on a new one, but he found out he wasted money on a used one. Then, hilariously enough, he got a Mercedes, and it was even worse. So then he went to Lexus, and he was happy. Listen to me, and went to Lexus. The BMWs, they cost a whole bunch of money. Notice their resale values are like way, way low because everybody knows they're endless money pits. You can get a used one cheap, but then again, unless you only drive it 3,000 or 4,000 miles a year, you're going to put a ton of money in it fixing it as it breaks down because it will break down. And parts are expensive. The guys who work on them charge a small fortune. It's just how BMWs are. Ernest Vegas says, Scotty, could you please answer my question? What do you think of the Unleaded 88 from Sheetz gas station? All right. Understand one thing. In each area of the United States, there's only a few and sometimes only one company that refines the gasoline. Then all the other companies buy it from that company and put their additives in it. So any gasoline sold in the United States is generally pretty close to the other ones aside from the additives that they put in. Of course, the higher the octane rate, an old car that needs high octane or a turbo that needs high octane, you got to buy the expensive stuff. If you got a normal car, you can run on a regular. I never did figure out why there's a Unleaded Plus, in the middle. Doesn't make any sense at all. My father, this is back in the 1970s, he said, I don't even know why we got this Exxon Plus. Who's buying it? You need high test, you get high test, you run around regular. It's just a marketing ploy, if anything else, really. But any gas sold in the United States has to meet certain federal specifications for anti-pollution, for additives and stuff. So any gas you buy in the United States is perfectly fine. Unless you're in some oddball, small little town that's got an old gas station that never sells much gas and the gas gets stale inside, then it will go bad. But, any regular gas station, they're buying and selling gas. Feel free to buy gas there in the United States. Xavier says, my Honda Accord makes a whistle sound passenger side in the front. Whistling sound, if you're talking about while you're moving down the road, that's an air leak somewhere. It could be the passenger outside rear view mirror assembly. It could be that there's a gap in the door, the hood, something isn't shut tight. If you've ever been in a wreck, a lot of times it's that your inner plastic fender liner gets bent and then the air rushes through and whistles. On the other hand, if it whistles just sitting there idling, then it could be a bad PCV valve. The positive crankcase ventilation valve sucks in the crankcase air and then reburns it instead of polluting the atmosphere with oil and gas. It just burns it back in the engine and they go bad. They can often whistle inside. You could also get a vacuum leak that whistles too. So figure out if it'll make it when it's just sitting there, check the PCV valve and the vacuum lines around there first because that's really the most common thing for that. Israel Poindexter says, Scotty, where do you live now? I heard you used to live in Clarksville, Tennessee. That's where I live. Well, yeah, that's my main residence. But I'm here visiting the grandkids in Massachusetts. So I'm here for months. Then I go back to Clarksville. And December 2nd or 3rd, I'll be back in Clarksville for 3 or 4 months. I split it between the grandkids. I'm helping the people on the East Coast now, answering questions here. I'll be back in Clarksville answering questions. You got problems in Clarksville? Set up an appointment. I check them out free. Same thing that I do here. I'm getting ready to leave Rhode Island here, and I'm going back to Clarksville. That's my permanent residence at Clarksville. So I'll be back. You want to meet me sometime? Film your car? Feel free to get a hold of me. Frank J.M. says, you must have a little Italian in you the way you flap your hands around. All right. No, none whatsoever. I had one of those DNA tests done. My wife got me the National Geo one for Christmas a few years ago, right? Turns out I'm like 94% Germanic, which makes sense. Kilmer's a German name. My mother's maiden name was Funk. Grandfather's name was Mueller. I mean, there's Germans all over the place. But strangely enough, I'm like 6% Asian, 7% Asian. Some German must have went on the Silk Road a long time ago. You know, these are Germanic hands. With the little Asian on the side. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.